What are my biggest question marks going into the Towson game?
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, new potential hires can feel like high-stake wagers for your small businesses. That's why LinkedIn Jobs help find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. On this Thursday, we're only a couple days away from kickoff for the Maryland Terrapins, and I could not be more ready. I feel like I'm about to go out there and play a game. I'm so excited to watch them play against a real opponent and start this new vibe that we have around the Maryland football program, and I can't wait to see it happen and see it on TV. I will be watching from here on the Big Ten Network. I got it all set up. I'm ready to go. I'm going to keep my eye also on the Ohio State-Indiana game for a potential upset maybe, and all the other Big Ten games. But I can't wait for Maryland to start the season. But there are some question marks that I have going into the season and going into this Towson game that could be answered for the rest of the season, or they could change depending on week to week. But here are my biggest question marks that could change the outlook of the season. It can be the difference between 6, 7 wins or 9, 10 wins. These question marks that I'm going to talk about, these are some of the biggest things that we've talked about all off seasons, but some of this stuff we haven't really talked about, but I'm interested in. And a lot of it has to do with Maryland not releasing a depth chart, which most teams release a depth chart so you have an idea where everyone lies, but Maryland didn't. So we have no idea what the starting groups are. I mean, obviously we know, like, have an idea of it, but we don't know for some of it. And that's what one of the things I'm going to talk about first that we is the biggest question mark that we really don't know much about is the starting Maryland offensive line. That's the number one thing going into the Towson game that I'm going to be looking out for. It's been talked about all season. It's what everyone has talked about. All the media has talked about it. Look up Maryland football question marks. You'll probably find something about the offensive line. But there's one question mark that we don't have there, and that's Delmar Glaze. We know Delmar Glaze is going to be starting at tackle, but the other 4 starters completely up in the air. I don't know if this one is a single other one is locked in. There are so many different pairings that I've heard that they've gone through in fall camp, whether it's Gottlieb at the other tackle spot and Eric Harris at center, or Emilio Moran at guard, or is it Purcell at center over Eric Harris, or is it Marcus Dumerville at guard? There's so many different combinations that I've heard that have been happening during fall camp, and that Coach Locksley told us that they haven't figured out their best 5. So that is the number one thing I'm going to be looking for going into the Towson game. But Coach Locksley did say they feel like they have 12 guys that they can play. And at first I was like, I said on this podcast, I was like, no, that is not true. 12 guys is crazy. If they had 12 guys that could play, then there would be more confidence in the way that they were talking about the offensive line. But the more and more I look at it, I'm like, maybe they do have like 10 guys that can play. It's a deep offensive line group. That's why I'm less concerned about injuries more than I'm concerned with how the actual 5 will mesh together and if that 5 will be good enough. But I'm less concerned about someone stepping in and having some depth along there because of how many people have played with the first string offense and how much rotation they've gotten. But will 5 guys have gotten enough play? You know what I mean? That's what I'm concerned about, is just the starting 5, less about the depth. But that is the biggest question mark going into Towson. And right away, that starting 5 that they run out there against Towson, I'm going to be looking at. I'm going to note it down because that's what's going to be the biggest leader in what we should expect for the rest of the season. And because usually the first five that they bring out in a game like this is the leading group. It's the starting group. And I expect them to rotate different guys during the game. But that is my number one question mark. And we'll see what they bring out. And then my number two question mark is something that people haven't really been talking about, but the running back room rotation. I know Roman Hemby's the number one back, and Roman Hemby is awesome, one of the best in the Big Ten, and is going to be a really good player. But we have an idea that Antoine Littleton obviously played the number two running back role last year and is a great complement to what Hemby does. But will Ramon Brown challenge for playing time? That's what I'm asking about. Or will Colby McDonald still be the third back? Colby McDonald had more carries and yards last year than Ramon Brown. So that's what I'm asking. Is Brown going to be able to get in the running back rotation? 4-star recruit. People have talked about on broadcast, whether I'm watching the spring game, whether I'm reading an article that the coaching staff has raved about Brown. So maybe Brown is in that rotation and rotates a lot with Hemby in that room. That's one of the question marks that I have. That's one of the things I want to see. But that's not something that people have been talking about a lot because I think we have so much confidence in Hemby. But can Ramon Brown push Hemby in different ways that we haven't seen? Obviously, Antoine Littleton, I think, just offers something completely different in terms of how big he is in the short yardage. But Brown brings similar stuff to what Hemby brings. And can he push Hemby or just push for more carries overall with how talented he was as a 4-star recruit? That's what I'm going to be looking out for. But we'll see what happens with that. But that's something that nobody's really been talking about, just because I understand because of how much confidence we have in Roman Hemby. But Maryland, one thing they love to do is they love to rotate their players. So we'll see what happens with the running back room rotation. And that leads me to maybe a bigger rotation that is a more important storyline that people are actually asking about is the wide receiver room rotation. It's our deepest position. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that. But what we do in the wide receiver room can define the season. I think there's a point where it's like we're rotating those guys too much, and our fifth, sixth, fourth guy are getting almost too much playing time where it's like, oh, like, where's our top three guys? They need to be playing more. Like, there's a point where they get too much rotation, but there's also a point where the young guys, Octavian Smith, Shalik Knox, Hot, and they get enough time for when it's next year and it's their turn to be the starting guys that they're ready to go. But I've also talked about how Octavian Smith, Shalik Knox are really talented guys in that room. They might be the most talented two in that whole room, but they're only true sophomores. And Tyrese Chambers, a 6-year graduate, or Jayshon Jones is a graduate student. So those two guys, and of course, Caden Prather are supposed to be the starting three, but where does Octavian Smith fit into that group? Because I've said that Octavian Smith offers something that the rest of them don't, and that is a deep threat. Caden Prather can go up and get it, of course, on some deep balls, but Octavian Smith can legit just run past guys unlike anybody else on the team and just brings that explosive element. So I'm going to be looking for in the Towson game what that rotation kind of looks like. Someone did ask a question about it during Coach Locksley's press conference about how the wide receiver rotation will go. And he pretty much said, we know, but we're not going to tell you. So he said it also can change week to week, but I want to see how it looks week one against Towson, what we're rolling out. I expect them to be a big rotation in that game just because it's Towson and we know we're going to win. So we want to get as many guys in and out. But heading into heading into Virginia game, I'm really interested to see how that room comes together because I think that's really important because I don't want to make it into a strength, into a weakness where we're rotating it too much in our top guys like Jayshon Jones, Caden Prather, Tyrese Chambers. And the interesting thing about Tyrese Chambers, he just got ranked as the number 3 wide receiver in the Big Ten on one of the Big Ten analyst lists, which is still really surprising to me. So how that wide receiver room comes together and how we continue to strengthen it and keep it a strength and it not become a weakness is going to be something I'm going to be keeping my eye out for sure in terms of the first game. But there are many more question marks to get to, including what does the tight end room look like? What does the defensive line rotation look like? And I will tell you all of it after this from LinkedIn. These days, new potential hires can feel like high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you can have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. A lot of people need jobs right now, and if you want to find someone amazing for your company, LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your jobs for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. There are many other question marks that we have to get into going into the Towson game that I think are really important. And I want to start with one that I don't think people are talking about enough, but can also be a really defining part of our team is the tight end room. Who replaces CJ Dupree? Of course, Corey Dyches is the number one, and we expect Corey Dyches to play awesome and to be one of the leading tight end wide receivers in the college football overall with the speed that he brings in. But we ran a ton of tight end two tight end sets last year, and I think how those come together and how Preston Howard and Rico Walker are being developed, how good of a players they are overall, and how well they can replace CJ Dupree is going to be a huge determinant in how much we can continue to run those sets, especially how good those guys are as blockers, because Corey Dyches is more of a receiving back for us. Obviously can do some blocking, but I'm looking at how well those guys can block, how well they can pass, protect, just that kind of things is what we want to see in terms of the tight end 2 spot, because we ran a ton of tight ends 2. We ran a ton of tight ends rotation stuff. So that's going to be really important in terms of how we want to do the offense. Can those guys continue to play at a high level? Because we don't want to take some of that stuff out, because we did that stuff at a really high level the past couple of years, and that's been a huge part of our playbook. So how well those guys do that is going to be a really important part of our team, and a really big question mark I'm going to be looking at. I'm expecting Preston Howard to be the tight end 2, but Rico Walker to also challenge for snaps. So that's going to be a question that I'm looking out for in the Towson game starting this weekend, 3:30 at the Shell. I'm looking at how well those guys can replace CJ Dupree and how well that looks, and how well the two tight end sets look, and if they're still successful, and if we can still run that stuff. I expect that we can. I expect Preston Howard's going to be a breakout. A lot of people don't know it, but just those two players overall. Rico Walker's a freshman. Preston's a redshirt freshman. Those guys haven't played very much. We know they have a ton of talent, but they're just a question mark for themselves, just how well they can step into the tight end room and provide depth. But also, they're just going to be playing because of how much we rotate and how many two tight end sets we run. So they're going to be playing a ton. But next, I want to talk about the pass rushing rotation and who are the starters. I know we got Donnell Brown out of the transfer portal, and Quayshawn Fuller, and Kellen Wyatt is a really talented sophomore. But who's starting out of those three guys? And then I also talked about Neo Avery. How much does he play? Those are a couple of question marks that I'm looking at going into the game. Is Kellen Wyatt starting at the jack linebacker spot as a true sophomore? I think he will, and I think he has a lot of talent. But how much of a jump can he make? That's a question mark for me that I'm going to start to see on Towson. I expect these guys to dominate Towson's offensive line a little bit. I talked about in the last podcast. Coach Locksley talked about how Towson averages 300 pounds on their offensive line, which isn't very normal for FCS programs, but Towson has that. So, but that doesn't mean I don't expect these guys to play really well this week. So how well they play and how well they dominate is going to be a huge indicator on the rest of the season. And that's one of the biggest question marks on how they rotate those guys for me going into this season. But I expect them all to rotate in and out. But I want to see who the starters are and who Coach Locksley trusts the most. Obviously, I think they're all three really good players, but it's an inexperienced group that hasn't played much. So we'll see how that goes. And that Towson game is the first chance to be able to see how that plays out. And then I want to see the other linebacker spot. I think this is extremely important for us because I think Jason Barham, I talked about a ton. We know he's starting on one spot. We know how good of a player he is. We know he was a freshman All-American. We know he can be a game wrecker, game changer. He's an NFL guy. He's a guy that's going to play on Sunday. Jason Barham is legit. But who is going to be the second guy? Ruben Hippolyte was injured a lot, but the reason I think who is going to be the second guy and that question mark is extremely important because I think if that guy can play elite, whether it's Ruben Hippolyte, whether it's Gote, whether it's Caleb Wheatland, who's also a true sophomore that really came on last year. Everyone was talking about Jason Barham, but Caleb Wheatland made some really good plays. And so he really surprised a lot of people, surprised me of how good of a player he was, how that linebacker 2 spot, who's starting there, can they transfer the linebacking room to good, to maybe one of the best in the Big Ten? Because we know Jason Barham is. I think Ruben Hippolyte has the tools. I think Ruben Hippolyte gets the edge there to start. But Ruben Hippolyte was injured last year a lot. So can he stay healthy? That's a question mark. But he is really good in tangible, just athleticism, all the things that he brings to the team. He has some really good traits, but I want to see if it can come together for a season. He was a pretty highly rated guy coming out of high school. I want to say a 4-star ranked recruit. So I want to see if Ruben Hippolyte can be a good starter. And then I think another question mark is how much they rotate the linebackers. Last year, it was a ton of rotation. Too much for me. I talked about it a lot, but I'm not big on rotating players a ton at certain spots. I feel like there should be two best linebackers. We know Jason Barham is one of them. I've talked about I'm going to be mad if Jason Barham comes out the game. He should not come out of the game. He's too good of a player to come out of the game at all. But that second linebacker spot, I almost am 100% sure they're going to rotate it a ton, no matter what game it is. But I'm almost a believer in there should be two good starters and guys that can really mesh and get used to it, to playing together instead of keep continuously rotating linebackers. On the defensive line, I want rotation. I want to keep those guys fresh. Even in our wide receiver room, I'm okay with rotation because of how deep it is. But at the linebacker room, I want to figure out our best two guys. And that's kind of a question mark for me. Has the staff changed that at all? We'll see. I doubt it. Coach Locksley has talked about how he likes to play a lot of guys. But can that linebacker room go from good to elite? And we should start to see it in the Towson game is a question mark for me going into the game. But I think the biggest question mark on defense that can truly change what we do, how well we can play, what coverages we can run is where is Tarheeb playing? Is he playing in the slot? Is he playing outside? If he's playing in the slot, I think there's a competition for the outside corner spot. Obviously, we know Cincinnati transfer Jaquan Shepard is going to take over one of those spots on the outside. But if Tarheeb's in the slot and Jaquan's on the outside, I think one of the biggest question marks is who starts on the other outside. Is it going to be Lionel, who's a sophomore, who's really long? I think he's got a lot of traits. I think he's a really good player. I think he played well. Or is it going to be Corey Coley, a junior now that played a lot as a sophomore, was kind of the next man up whenever Deontay Banks or Jacorian Bennett would be out of the game? Who takes that spot if Tarheeb's playing inside? But Coach Locksley talked about how Tarheeb's been playing a lot outside this camp. So if he plays outside, who takes over the slot role? I think it's going to be the biggest question mark for me on the defense, because in terms of Corey Coley, Lionel, those guys haven't played a ton as starters. And I'm going to be honest, Coley got attacked sometimes in coverages last year when he was in. I remember against Michigan State, they scored a touchdown against him. He's just been attacked different times. I think he's a good player. But if you get poor cornerback play from just one of the spots, it can be so challenging to run certain man-to-man coverages, to run certain blitz stuff. And we don't want to sit in zone all the time. Obviously, it's okay to play zone a good amount of time, but we don't want to sit in zone every play and just let the defense pick us apart and get used to playing in the zone. We want to mix it up and run some man stuff. And if we can't have one of our corners that can cover, then there's not much we can do. It's hard. We can put a safety over top. We can have Bo, Braid, or Dante over top of him to help out, which might happen. But that's my biggest question mark is what is the third cornerback look like in this room? We know Tarheeb, we know Jaquan, but that's one of the biggest question marks. And then my last question mark is on the interior defensive line. That group is inexperienced. Jordan Phillips and Aking Basote are expected to be starters. None of those guys have been starters yet. Jordan Phillips, a redshirt freshman. Aking Basote has been in the defensive line rotation for a while now, but those guys haven't played. So that is one of my biggest question marks going into the Towson game. Can those guys stop the run against Towson? I hope so, or we're in trouble. But how well those guys can stop the run, how well they can get to the quarterback, one of the biggest question marks on defense, because those guys are completely new starters. Even across the defensive end group, the whole defensive line is it's really talented though. I'd say it's more talented than last year, but it's inexperienced. So how well those guys can come together fast is one of my biggest question marks. But those are going to be some of the things I'm looking at going into the Towson. One of Maryland's biggest recruits, maybe the biggest recruit they have landed in a while, is set to visit this weekend. I'm going to talk about it after this. College football season is here, and Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it, so you guys can tune on right here on Locked On Terps. One of the biggest 24 recruits that could just completely change the look of our class, can bring us ranked way higher in terms of the recruiting rankings if we can find a way to pull. Ernest Willor was a 5-star at a point, but now is a very highly rated 4-star, top 100 guy, about 96 in the country, 86 in the country, somewhere around there, depending on where you look. Talented guy, very talented guy, 6'4", 250, huge, can absolutely change this class, and he's expected to go and be at the Towson game this weekend. And so if we can find a way to, I don't want to say lock him up, but make up some ground on the first visit against Towson, it can go a far way because the big dogs are coming. He's got all of them. He's got Ohio State. He's got Bama. He's got Penn State. He's got the big dogs. So can we stay with those guys? This weekend's going to go a huge way in deciding that, and we need a talented edge player like that in our 24 class. It can really change that class, I think. We're looking at Jalen Harvey, too, of course, who released his top 3 a couple weeks ago, and it was USC, Penn State, and Maryland. He's a 4-star guy, and can we pull both of them? If we can pull both of them, our 24 class is the perfect type of class. We would be up to like 7 4-stars on Rivals, which would be amazing, which would be exactly where we want to be. I think we would be a top 25 class. And we have 2 guys at positions that are highly rated that we haven't had in Ernest Willor and Jalen Harvey. But if we can pull one of them, I'll be happy. Ernest Willor, Penn State has the lead on him. So obviously we want both, but really I'm just looking at if we can get one of those guys, then I'm going to be happy. But I just don't know with the big dogs. I know Penn State had the lead on Jalen Harvey, and I don't really know. Ernest Willor, the recruitment's been no one really knows what's going on with it. And so the visit this weekend to Maryland is definitely promising. Can Coach Locksley pull through and get Ernest Willor to commit to Maryland? That will be huge. That will maybe be his best. No, I would have to say flipping Rakeem Jarrett to LSU is the number 1. Jason Barham is up there. But top 3 recruits in Coach Locksley's era, definitely. But that's all we have today. Please like and subscribe. We're giving coverage all week long. Tomorrow we'll be back to talk more about the Towson game. And then on Monday, we'll be back to talk about what happened, how did it look. But please like and subscribe, and thank you for listening to Locked On Terps.